I isolate this topic because I do think it's a good example of how things happen. So baseball announced that they were mashing all of the stats together, that now when you look at the rankings of batting average, they include the Negro leagues. Obviously, black players during a certain time were just not allowed to play in the American League or the National League, and that wasn't fair. So they now have decided to retroactively just mash it all together, and there were impassioned speeches for it. And I think it's a good example of something to talk about, because I was thinking about it. I was going, this is just not a hill to die on. It's too low stakes to die on it. And yet I went from going, yeah, I guess that makes sense when I first heard it talked about, to actually looking into it and going, yeah, I don't know if this totally makes sense. But that position, when you don't know if it totally makes sense, you also go, wait a second, if I make my argument for why it doesn't totally make sense, I am going to be pilloried. And then this is going to be attached to my name as a cause that I deeply care about, fighting the Negro League inclusion. And it's just not worth it. So I'm just going to not say anything. And that's how a lot of things happen, because I immediately went, okay, yeah, it makes sense. But then, you look into it, and I look up a Yankees season, or, a season, and I didn't know that they had included all the statistics. So if you were to look up one of the great Yankee seasons in 1932 on Baseball Reference, you look at the standings, and now the Detroit Wolves are number one, having won 26 games and losing 5 games, because in the Negro Leagues, they played far fewer games. And I'm looking at that, I'm going, yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense. And it kind of is just weird. And the Chicago American Giants are second. And then the New York Yankees, with 107 games that they've won, are in there. And a lot of those seasons in the Negro Leagues it was 60 to 70 games. And so you wouldn't even count that as batting average in Major League Baseball. You have to get to, I don't know if it was 502 plate appearances before your averages get counted. So I think something strange has happened here, where nobody really wants to fight it or say that this doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not high stakes enough. And yet I look at it as kind of like a weird retconning of history. And instead of just respecting the production in this other league and having the Baseball Reference, I want the statistics for all of this. There's this weird impulse to almost pretend that history didn't happen, or to correct history. And I don't think it can be done. So that's my whole soliloquy on it, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to it. It wasn't something that I felt very strongly about, at least not enough to invest emotional energy. I was like, okay, they're going to do it. There's nothing I can do about it. It's the way things are. I don't really look up the baseball record book all that often. I mean, I watch baseball every day and I love it, but I don't have the same type of, deep-seated attachment to the record book that old-timey fans have. I feel like coming up in the steroid era and just starting to realize, okay, you can't compare all these eras to each other. It's just like NFL passing stats normalized to the 1960s and 70s. It's not a method of comparison that is going to ever make any sense. And so I don't get wrapped up in these historical metrics. And so I was like, I think this is a bad idea, but not enough to voice any type of public opinion on it.
Yeah, it's just not worth it because of the blowback, because it becomes this idea that you are, I guess, on the wrong side of history, or you're continuing the unfairness against these players. But at the same time, it is weird to suddenly have this rankings of hitting, because it is easier, or at least more probable, for you to have a really high batting average over a short stretch, because water will find its level over a longer stretch. And over 50, 60, 70 games, yeah, you could probably sustain a higher average. Now, apparently, Ted Williams has been knocked down to 10th Yeah, how do you feel about that, Bostonians? How do you feel about it? I don't feel any particular way about it. But yeah, I don't think it makes a terrific amount of sense. But to what you're saying, a lot of things are like this. You go, okay, this is happening. It's not a live ball, as it were. And while I can poke a hole in it here or there, it's just not worth it to me reputationally, especially if I lack my own website and paywall and everything else. It's just not worth it to suddenly become that guy against the cause. And so it's not a high stakes issue, but in a way it's illustrative of how a lot of these other things go.